But if he thus say, I have no delight in thee, behold, here I am. I let him do to me as seemeth good unto him. So David, he's not walking in a form of pride to say, God's with me and he needs to be with me and I'm on God's side. He's recognizing that this is a circumstance that God has allowed in his life. And he's demonstrating, I think, a lot of humility there in being surrendered to what God was doing in his life at that point. So who were these priests? If we remember in 1 Samuel, Abiathar was one of the priests who escaped from Saul because Abiathar's father, Ahimelech, gave some help to David when he was fleeing from Saul. Saul found out about it and came in and killed Abiathar, it appears, and then as well as all the priests of the Lord, it says, or most of the priests of the Lord, because apparently Abiathar and Zadok, who was Abiathar's uncle, made it out alive. So when Abiathar fled, he fled to David, and David basically took him in and gave him protection. And so Abiathar was one of David's good friends. Abiathar was loyal to David. That's why he wanted to flee Jerusalem with David. And so they were demonstrating that they were still loyal to David. They still loved him. So it's at this point that David finds out that Ahithophel had joined the conspiracy against him with Absalom. 2 Samuel 15, it says, And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And so then at this point, Hushai shows up and says, hey, here I am. And David gets the idea to send Hushai back to Jerusalem, to Absalom, to be a spy and a saboteur to Absalom's plans and to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel, which I think is really kind of very a really cool twist to the story. So David sets up this spy network through Hushai and tells Hushai that Ahimaaz and Jonathan, the priest's sons, can be trusted and used to get word back to David about Absalom's plans. So those who say that religion and politics don't mix, here these priests are engaged in politics, and they're helping to support the king, which is fascinating. So Ahithophel versus Hushai, who were they? In 1 Chronicles, it actually gives a little snapshot about what their position was in David's kingdom. And it says, Ahithophel was the king's counselor, and Hushai the Archite was the king's companion, which is interesting. So David saw and valued Ahithophel significantly, not only based on what he says in 2 Samuel 7 or 15, and when he realized that Ahithophel was joining Absalom, that was David's number one concern. He wasn't nearly as concerned that Absalom was rebelling against him. What it appears he's primarily concerned about is that here's Ahithophel has this great counsel. He's so smart and wise, and he's joining Absalom. So his number one prayer was that God would defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. So David valued Ahithophel's counsel, and he was his counselor. And Hushai was the king's companion, which is interesting. He wasn't necessarily regarded as his counselor. So a companion to the king kind of sounds like maybe he was his golf buddy or his, his archery pal. He would, I guess, he saw him as a friend, as someone that, your buddy or your friend, you're gonna take counsel from, but not necessarily regard it to the level of being a trusted counselor. And sure enough, Hushai's companionship was demonstrated, how he demonstrated his loyalty to David. And so having good counsel doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be loyal, which is interesting. So this brings us to chapter 17. And it starts out with Ahithophel's good advice that he gives to Absalom. And he says, okay, so let me take 12,000 men, and tonight I'm going to go pursue after David. So what he was doing was he was using a very good military tactic of the element of surprise. He was going to try to surprise David when he was off, when he wasn't necessarily ready for an attack or aware of an attack, and it was going to be at night, which is another significant advantage that he would have had, because David wouldn't necessarily have known where the attack was coming from or who was attacking, but Ahithophel would have known that. He would have had the ability to stake out and to lay out his plans and know who and where he was attacking. So Ahithophel, sure enough, gives good advice. And yet Absalom says, oh, I wonder what Hushai would say. So then when Absalom asks Hushai, no, why is it that, I wonder why Absalom regarded Hushai as someone to be trusted over, or at least at the same level of Ahithophel. Apparently, he knew that both of these guys were were in David's leadership team, but he apparently didn't understand or value what Ahithophel said over what Hushai said. So Hushai starts out with a blanket discrediting of Ahithophel's counsel and says, Hushai said unto Absalom, the counsel of Ahithophel is not good at this time. So then Hushai uses a logical fallacy to distract from the relevant details. And it says, for, said Hushai, thou knowest thy father and his men, that they be mighty men, and they be crafted in their and they be chafed in their minds, as a bear robbed of her whelps in the field. And thy father is a man of war, and will not lodge with the people. Now that was a factual statement, but it was a distracting, irrelevant detail that didn't necessarily answer the tactic of how to attack. And so by giving a factual statement about who David was, Hushai was giving his advice some credibility. And he was also distracting from the real issues. So for my children who have learned about logical fallacies, what kind of fallacy is this? Right. This is a red herring. He's bringing up a detail that it's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily, it's true that his dad's going to be mad and these guys are going to be upset and they're mighty warriors, but that really doesn't point to the necessary tactic to use or to employ, whether he's going to attack at night or gather all of Israel together. And so then Hushai gives this emotional appeal that sounds good, but it lacked substance. And he says, "So when we come upon him in some place where he shall be found, we will light upon him as the dew falleth on the ground. And of him and of all the men that are with him, there shall be not so much as one." So that sounds great. That sounds really like a good plan, but it's really it doesn't have a lot of substance. It's very emotional. And falling on him as the dew falleth on the ground, well, that's actually what Ahithophel would have done, because dew falls on the ground at what time of the day? It's when it's dark out. It's when it's at night, basically, or in the early morning. So that would have been what Ahithophel had done. I mean, if Ahithophel's plans had been followed, that would have been what was accomplished. So Hushai's, he stated details that were factual and they sounded persuasive, but they were not relevant to the discussion. And then Hushai goes on even more and talks about the possibility of a siege, which apparently was something that must have been discussed, because he says, "Moreover, if he be gotten into a city, then shall all Israel bring ropes to that city, and we will draw it into the river, until there be not one small stone found there." Well, that sounds very interesting, but I don't know of any story in the history of warfare where a besieged city was able to be drawn into the river with ropes. Even with the mighty army of King Nebuchadnezzar, he wasn't able to destroy a city in that way, destroy the city of Jerusalem in that way. So, getting ropes around city walls to pull them down when it's besieged, sounds nice, but it's not very practical. And I don't think it was ever something that could have been possible. So Hushai gives this intentionally bad advice, and it accomplishes the effect of, God used it to accomplish the effect of defeating Ahithophel's good advice. And then Hushai turns and warns David through the spy network. Now it's interesting, the advice that Hushai did give was to slow down, to not attack right away, but to come back and take the time, gather all Israel together, and then attack as the entire nation of Israel against David. So that had the effect of giving David time, and giving Hushai time to get the word to David, as well as giving David time to flee. So, in summary, at the end of this story, Ahithophel, when he realizes that his advice was not followed, he goes and hangs himself. And this was a question that I had, and why would he hang himself? And I think it's that he realized that Absalom didn't have the ability to discern and differentiate good advice from bad advice. So he took the intentionally bad advice from Hushai over his good plan. And when Ahithophel realized that, he probably realized, you know what, I'm following a fool here, somebody that doesn't even have the ability to understand the basics of leadership and warfare. And And actually that was, Hushai kind of implies that David and his men were experienced warriors. So that's sort of pointing to the fact that Absalom, he was probably not an experienced warrior. He was probably one of these, because he's as the king's son, he probably stayed home a lot and didn't see very much warfare. So when Ahithophel realizes that he's followed Absalom foolishly, he probably realized he had no other choice, because he couldn't go back to David, and he was with somebody that didn't value or appreciate his advice. And he probably understood that, okay, well, it's over. It's over for Absalom. We don't really, he's going to lose. He's going to get destroyed, and it's going to be over. And so he goes and kills himself. It reminds me of Proverbs 13:20, which says, "He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed." And so Ahithophel, even though he was a very smart person, had a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things, he followed a foolish person. He was a companion of fools. It's also interesting that loyalty to a God-ordained authority is better than smart counsel. So it was better that Hushai was loyal to David than Ahithophel, even though he was so smart. His lack of loyalty resulted in his downfall. Also, trust in the Lord is better than trust in human counselors. So I think it's interesting in 2 Samuel 15, when David finds out about Ahithophel joining Absalom, the first thing he does is pray to the Lord that he would defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. And so God was able to turn the counsel of Ahithophel, and he answered David's prayer in that. So how does this apply to the Lord's Supper? I think the story about Hushai and how David sent Hushai back to Jerusalem to be under the kingdom of